Thank you for tuning in to this TAM Lab Nano recording, where today we'll be replacing a vCenter server certificate. The first thing we're going to do is check out the vCenter Server 8.0 Update 2 release notes, which call out a new feature of non-disruptive SSL certificate renewal and replacement. We're going to look quickly at a lab that we've set up to do this demo in. And then finally, we're going to use the API to replace the SSL certificate on the vCenter server in this lab. So the first thing here, the vCenter Server 8.0 Update 2 release notes call out non-disruptive SSL renewal and replacement. It even gives us a link with some additional information and a video of doing this from the UI. But today, we're going to use this lab right here. We're actually in VMware Workstation. We've got two virtual machines running. We have this management server that's a domain controller. It's a certificate authority. It runs DNS. We've got a web browser. We've got Power CLI. We've got all of our tools on this one VM. And then we also have a nested ESXi host. And on this host is our vCenter server appliance. We're going to turn off this navigation here, give ourselves a little bit more room to work with. And then the first thing we're going to do is just fire open our web browser. And we'll use our link to our vCenter server appliance. We can see that we get an SSL certificate warning that our certificate authority is invalid. So we'll just go ahead and continue anyway. And we'll go ahead and log in as our administrator user. And while that's logging in, we're going to minimize this window. We're going to use OpenSSL to just check our vCenter and get our certificate details back. So this OpenSSL S client will connect and the certificate will be returned. And if we scroll up and look through here, we can see that the issuer of this certificate is the vCenter itself, right? So this is a self-assigned certificate. So we'll minimize that and go back to our browser where we're logged in now. We'll expand our inventory here just to look through this a little bit, and we can see that inventory I talked about, right? This is our vCenter server appliance. It's running on our nested ESXi host, and that's what we're looking at in this lab. So the first thing we're going to check out is in Developer Center. Inside of the web client here, there's an API Explorer that shows us some of the REST APIs that we can interact with. The default API is the vCenter API, and that's the one where we have the SSL certificate replacement methods. So we'll go in here and we'll just filter this list for TLS. And you can see that there are two APIs that we can call here. We can post to a TLS CSR for a certificate signing request. And then we can also post to this, or send a put to this TLS certificate to actually replace our HTTP proxy certificate. And we've got a little bit more detail on documentation and such here. And so we could actually, if we wanted to go through and, click on the put, we could get our details. We could try this out from right inside the web client. But instead, for the demo today, we're going to use Power CLI just to not be dependent on the web client while we're making changes to that certificate. So we're going to minimize this. We're going to fire open PowerShell window. We'll zoom in, make this a little bit bigger. Typically, when we use Power CLI, the first commandlet we run is connect VI server, right, which is our virtual infrastructure server. That's the typical connect commandlet we'll use. In this case, we'll actually connect to the CIS server. Right? These are those REST APIs that we were looking at in the developer area of the web client. So this is going to take a second, and what should happen here is we'll get a warning that our certificate is untrusted. And once that pops up, we'll press O to accept it just one time here, right? So we can, says it couldn't trust our certificate. What do you want to do? And we'll say this one time, we'll go ahead and accept. All right, so the first thing we need to do is create a certificate signing request that we're going to send to our certificate authority to create a certificate. So we're going to do that right here by calling that TLS CSR certificate that we looked at in Developer Center earlier. And then we're going to call that service and have it help us create this variable where we're going to store all of our details, right? So if we come in here and do a TLS CSR spec and hit enter, right, it gives us all of the properties that we need to populate to be able to create our certificate signing request. So I've already got those all filled out, so I'm just going to copy and paste that to save a little bit of time here. But we've got our common name, which is our FQDN of this vCenter. We get some organizational information, an email address, and then the subject alternative name. As it says up here, we can have kind of an array of strings. So we gave it the IP address of the vCenter and then the short name of the appliance as well. All right, and then now we're going to actually call that create method on the service that we connected to earlier, and it's going to create a CSR for us. And now we can look at our certificate signing request. And this kind of string of text should look familiar for those who've replaced certificates before. And so we're just going to copy it, and we'll take it to our CA here in just a second. I'll pause for just a moment. For those who've done this before, right? Typically, when you create a certificate signing request, there are two pieces. There's the key and then the CSR, and that private key, is kind of related to the CSR. Typically, you would need both of those to replace a certificate. In this case, vCenter actually has that private key. It knows what private key it used to create the CSR. So all we have here is the CSR. We'll go take that to our CA. And when we come back to replace our certificate, once we have that certificate file, we'll not need to provide a private key because vCenter already knows what our private key is. So we're going to go back to our web browser here. And like I said, this is a Windows box that's running our certificate authority as well. So we'll go into localhost cert serve. And so we'll need two things here. The first thing I like to do is get our CA certificate, right? When we replace our certificate, we'll need that. And so I'm just going to pick our certificate authority. We'll switch to base 64. And we'll download our CA certificate. And we'll go into this folder where it's called, right? It just called it cert new. I'm going to change that name and say that it is a CA cert. All right, and now we'll go back. We're going to request a certificate. It's going to be an advanced certificate request where we already have our certificate signing request. We'll just paste that into this box here. And we'll use the default web server certificate template. So now we've got a certificate created. We're going to go in here and we're going to download the base 64 version of that certificate. And again, I'm going to rename the file here. Instead of cert new, we'll call it cert new VCSA API, right? Because we're going to use the API to replace that VCSA certificate. All right, so we've got our certificate files that we need. One thing that I claimed was that our process here was going to be non-disruptive. So I'm going to open up another command prompt. and we'll do an SSH to our vCenter appliance. And we'll keep an eye on services as they restart, or as we replace our certificate, right? Like the thought is like not all services are going to restart. And so we'll just watch for that just to make sure that that's the behavior we actually see. And so we'll just say watch every 10 seconds, we'll issue a service control status all. So that takes a few seconds to run, but we'll just leave this kind of running here in the background. So we can see that there are a couple of services that are stopped. The majority of the services on our appliance are running. So we'll just leave that up here in the top corner. We'll drag this down so we can watch that while it's updating. You can see the times changing up there in the top right. All right, so we're back to our PowerShell window here. We have our certificate files. We're still connected to our CIS server from earlier. We're going to change directories to our downloads directory where we have our 2 certificate files. So the next thing we need to do is just read those values into some variables here so we can use them. We're using get content to get the content of those files, and typically get content will return 1 line of a file at a time. And what we actually want is a variable that stores all of the lines of the file. So we're just getting all of the content 1 line at a time, and then we're just joining it together with a new line character, and then just trimming any like leading or trailing spaces off of that new variable that we have. So like if we were to look at cert, we can see that we have just 1 big long string of text. That is our certificate that we're going to use. All right, and so we have that variable that is our CIS service for TLS CSR. We're going to create kind of an equivalent one here for the TLS API method that we were looking at before, not the certificate signing request. And then we're going to do the same thing where we use help to get a set spec as a new variable, right? So if we look at this, we have set TLS, and it's asking us for the cert, the key, and the root cert. Like I mentioned earlier, the vCenter already knows about the key, so we're not going to provide that. We're just going to give it the certificate and the root certificate. So we'll paste that in here. And then the last step is to just call that TLS service, the set method, and give it our variable here where we've added our certificate and our root CA. There's invalid start date. The certificate is not valid until 11:53. So I think that's what that is telling me, is that the time is off between my vCenter server appliance and my certificate authority. And it's off by a fair amount here. Let's check on this. All right, we'll look at our time, and we're using a legit time source. But that is not right. Correct time should be about 8 minutes after the hour. So we'll see if this save updates our vCenter appliance's time. All right, there we go. So I think that that did adjust our time. So we'll go back to our windows here, and we'll try and run that same command again. This does take a second, so we'll let that keep running. I'm going to go ahead and open another window here. And just for grins, we'll run our open SSL command again. We haven't seen any services change over here. But if we scroll back, you can see our issuer has not changed just yet, so we're just waiting for that to complete. There we can see that our certificate has changed, right? These are the values that we fed in. The issuer is our example root certificate authority. So the vCenter is responding with that new cert already. We're still waiting for this, this method to finish. We've been watching services over here. We haven't seen them all restart, right? Which was a common occurrence pre-8.0 update 2. Going to go ahead and close out of all of my browser tabs here. Just close out of browser completely. Because when we go to our open SSL and we look at this, we're getting the correct certificate. So this hasn't, there we go. This is returned, this is returning the correct certificate. So I'm going to close out some of these windows. We can see here, again, our services are still running. They haven't all restarted. All right, and now when we access our vCenter appliance, you can see we didn't receive a certificate warning. This isn't red like it was before. It's showing that it's happy and trusting our certificate, so that's good news. We'll fire open our PowerShell window again, and we're going to connect back to that CIS service like we did before. We're not actually going to make any changes or call anything, but the expectation is that we're not going to receive a certificate warning this time. So we'll wait for that to complete. Just confirm that that is the case. So there we have it. We were able to connect to that same vCenter using the Connect CIS server commandlet, and we did not receive any sort of warning or anything like we did before. And we'll do the same thing just kind of for confirmation with a Connect VI server, right? That's the more familiar commandlet that you would connect to vCenter with to run things like get VM or whatnot. And we can even do a get VM just for good measure. And we'll see that the only VM we have is our vCenter server appliance. And so there we have it. We were able to replace a vCenter server 8.0 update 2 certificate without restarting all of our services. We did so using those API commandlets that we were looking at. And now we have a trusted certificate installed. The only hiccup being the NTP issue that we ran into. So there we have it. Appreciate you watching this video. If you have any questions, please leave a comment.